Hi, everybody, welcome. Welcome members and invitees and officers to the Safer Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The Council, a bit of housekeeping. The Council welcomes the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I've not received any requests to use Welsh today, so the meeting will be conducted in English only. This meeting is being webcast, so please turn off, silence your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. For our invitees' information, in case of a fire drill, please follow the signs to exit the building. The register has been circulating. Please sign and declare any interests in the book. And have we received any apologies for the meeting today?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillors Stuart Ashley, Faye Jones, Raymond Wells and Chris Tew.
Thank you. Members, declarations of interest. Have you got any declarations of interest to declare?
No.
No? Okay. Thank you very much. On to agenda item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of June. Members, these minutes relate to the short meeting we had before visioning regarding progress against the adopted Wales Audit Office Action Plan. Members, can you confirm that they're a correct and accurate record, please? Yeah? Okay. Agenda item 5 is the action sheet. I know there's nothing on there to update, so we'll skip past that. Agenda item number 5, Regional Homeless Strategy. The purpose of this report is to update committee members on progress that has been made in developing a local homeless review and regional homeless strategy, and also the work that has been carried out to meet the Wales Audit Office's proposals within their recent study on homelessness. I'd like to welcome Neil Howell and Elka, both who work within the Housing Department and our Group Manager and Head of Housing. They will give members an overview of the report. I'd also like to welcome Alicia from Taipei, who, please at any point after the report you'd like to ask any questions or say anything, please feel free to interrupt. Over to Neil and Elka. Yeah.
Taipei. Could you explain who Taipei is, please?
Yes. Sorry, I failed first step. Taipei is a national a charity and organisation that promotes equality in housing. We're a membership organisation. Torfaen Council is a member of Taipei. All housing associations in Wales are members of Taipei, and some councils and umbrella organisations. And we do two main things really. One is to work with the government to influence policies and legislation to make sure equality and diversity is embedded into national policy making, and the impact on people, on various groups, is considered. And the second thing is to work directly with our members to help them consider equality and diversity in their policies, but also practices as well. And that ranges from policy reviews to kind of helping them run longer term programs focusing on various issues, be it accessibility, disability, hate crime, issues related to sexual orientation and housing, refugees and so on. So it's quite a broad remit.
Thank you.
Thank you. So over to Neil Oroka. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report, as you identified in your introduction, is in two parts. The first explains our approach to requirement by Welsh Government to develop a homelessness strategy, and also to undertake a homelessness review during this year in readiness for April of next year. So it's a Welsh Government requirement in part of the legislation, the recent Housing Act, to develop undertake a review of homelessness and to develop a homelessness strategy. The second part is an update for members of the committee in terms of the Wales Audit Office report, which they undertook about 18 months back, looking at homelessness demand and how local authorities were able to manage demand, but also identifying examples of good practice. So we provided an update as part of the report on the recommendations. I think there's eight recommendations in the Wales Audit Office report. So we provided members with an update in terms of progress against those recommendations.
members. So have you got any questions for officers? Okay, thank you.
Would there be any situation where tents would be provided as temporary accommodation for a person or persons who present themselves as homeless?
Tents are made available to individuals or households on occasions. We, for example, as a local authority, we are required to have an extreme weather plan, which we have in Torfaen as other local authorities. And there may be occasions where tents, sleeping bags, torches and other equipment are provided to homeless households who we may not owe a duty or who may wish to reside in a tent. We work closely in the main with Torfaen and Blaenau Gwent Mind, and we issue cold weather funding, which Welsh Government make available, and that can often be used to provide tents and other equipment to accommodate individuals. Obviously, our ideal is that people aren't residing in tents, but we'll cover probably some of that later.
Councillor Evans, did you want to come back in on that? No? No. Ron? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. What did you say about providing tents? I was surprised a couple of weeks ago there was somebody homeless down in Canal Bank, yes, sorry. And I was in a home there, and we were talking about them, and the neighbour was taking his dinner over. But she was going on holiday, then the lady I was with, I was there the next day, she was taking, and I was so surprised. I mean, apparently he's a lovely boy, the clinic's no fault of his, and the neighbours were feeding him as well. They were actually cooking for him and taking roast dinners too. I was there when the lady was taking a roast dinner, and I know he's gone now, but I don't know what's happened there, but it's the fact that he was in a tent, provided with a tent, and then there were people looking after him as well. I thought how nice that was.
I think that sort of answers quite a lot of questions. Dave, I know that you wanted to come in here.
Yes, thanks for that, Chair. So you said certain situations that you'll give out tents. Could you give us an example of a situation where you would? And when you do give out these tents, do you kind of explain where people should be pitching these tents then?
In the main, what I am pleased to say is we've got in Torfaen is we've got a rough sleeper working group that meets regularly, which will involve our partners within community safety, police, social care or whomever. So we are constantly mindful of any rough sleeping within the county, and obviously that is not a situation we want to be in. There are circumstances, and it's usually through the Torfaen Mind services that operate across the county where tents and other pieces of equipment are provided. There are instances where there may be rough sleepers who, all rough sleepers we interact with and we offer support and prevention and advice and assistance. There are occasions where rough sleepers may actually wish to reside in a tent. So we have in the past, for example, undertaken mental health assessments with individuals to see if that decision is with capacity. So there are situations where people will sleep rough in tents. There are also situations where we have accommodated individuals who have then left premises of their own inclination and then gone on to rough sleep. It's a conundrum for right across England and Wales at the moment. You'll know it's readily always in the news and the media around the levels of rough sleeping. It's not ideal, individuals sleeping in tents. We would not advise individuals to sleep in certain locations. We couldn't do that. It would be inappropriate.
Just, and I don't want to labour this quite really, but where in there, because I know that when somebody presents as homeless, where in, so you've got section 60, 62, 68, you've got all of those, where do they fit in with that, or are these people that are not actually covered by some homeless policy, and are we trying, is this just the best that we can do without, basically turning them away?
Firstly, we would look at priority needs, so we would establish whether there's a priority need for the individual or individuals. We would also look at, we may, for example, while we're determining our obligations, we may accommodate somebody pending investigation. We would also look at intentionality. So, for example, if somebody, through their own behaviours, have made themselves intentionally homeless or refused suitable accommodation, there are a number of scenarios. It may be that we deem we don't have a duty to accommodate. We do have a statutory duty to work with those who present to us to try and proactively prevent homelessness. So our first port of call is typically to try and work with for example, a current landlord who may be evicting an individual or a household. We would try and proactively work with those to save that tenancy. And there's a number of other factors, such as services and products we may assist with, such as rent in advance, bonds, helping to pay arrears, and working with partners obviously around the other complex needs as well. So we engage support workers and whoever else may be suitable.
Back to sort of the strategy really, one of the questions that I had, throughout the report it talks about working regionally to provide a homelessness strategy. What did you find were the negatives and positives of that working regionally?
I think just by way of introduction, we did have some discussions with Welsh Government very early on around the potential to work or develop a strategy on a regional basis. They were very supportive, recognising, I suppose, that circumstances that individuals or families face are very similar across Wales. What we wanted to do, I suppose, the positives are we wanted to cut down on duplication, because the potential was that we would develop 5 local strategies for each of the 5 Gwent local authorities, which would be or could be remarkably similar. And obviously the outcomes and what we're trying to do in terms of early intervention, prevention, some of those actions would be, again, very, very similar in terms of their approach. So recognising that very early on, we did approach Welsh Government. They were very supportive, as they have been. I think another region, the North Wales region, is also looking at developing a regional approach to developing the strategy. One thing I would say is Welsh Government were insistent upon, and we recognise the importance of, developing local reviews. So it's important to us that we develop a real understanding of the challenges that Torfaen face, and I suppose what actions, what recommendations we need to put in place to tackle some of those challenges. So whilst the strategy is developed on a regional basis, each of the 5 local authorities have undertaken a local review and will have both a regional and a local action plan. I'll hand over to Arco in terms of some of the benefits that we could derive from developing the strategy on that basis.
Members will know that we've got really good joint working arrangements across Gwent with a number of different fora and areas. I suppose for me, we recognise that homelessness doesn't sit within a locality basis. People move around. We have different housing markets across the 5 authorities. We have different demographies. We can learn from our partner or local authorities and share good practice. We can pool resources where it makes sense. So some of the things that may not have been deliverable on a single locality basis, we can embark upon on a regional or a sub-regional basis. For us, it made absolute sense to do a regional strategy. So we've got an officer group that have been very focused and very dedicated to involving stakeholders through consultation. There are efficiencies in terms of doing a strategy regionally. For example, we had a consultation event located in Torfaen, but for all Gwent stakeholder organisations, where we had over 140 individuals in attendance. If we'd done that on a locality basis, we may have missed certain pieces of information or intelligence that it's useful to capture. Picking up on the other part of the question around some of the negatives, that's a really good question actually. I think in terms of the approval mechanisms, we're mindful that we're going to be going through our respective scrutiny and governance arrangements, and we're identifying a regional strategy. So it's getting all partners, all local authorities to agree to one strategy. So I think what we've done is we've tried to pitch the strategy at quite a high level so it caters for all of our needs, and it'll then be within the regional action plan and then some of the local actions that are more bespoke to individual local authorities that can cater for some of the differences as well, if that helps. Yeah.
I think one of the, from what I remember, one of the kind of good sides of working regionally was the idea for the discharge from hospital protocol, which is, I think, one of the positives that came out from your kind of regional working and considering how discharge from protocol from hospital discharge is approached. And I can only assume this is about kind of preventing delayed discharge of care and having right accommodation of the right people, and for us this is a fantastic example of working together, and we're looking forward to see how what impact it has. Accessibility of accommodation and suitability is a big issue across Wales. So well done on that.
Ron, I think that you all
question too. Why was Torfaen chosen to act as the lead authority for the officer working group when we have the least amount of people experience with people presenting themselves as homeless in comparison to Newport, for example?
I'm pleased to report, I suppose, that there is, as Elke mentioned earlier on, there's a good history of joint working and regional approaches in Gwent. Torfaen is very well respected, I suppose, in terms of quality of members of staff, the experience that we have. We did have a discussion about who would take the lead. I suppose we volunteered to do that because one, we want, you'd like to make sure that things progress the way that you'd like them to. I think I was very conscious that we wanted to make sure the requirements of the Housing Act were met in terms of having a strategy and review undertaken within the required timescales. I think we do have, very experienced, knowledgeable members of staff. We are obviously a smaller authority, and you'd think, well, perhaps Newport and Caerphilly, who are larger authorities, probably do experience homelessness in terms of numbers, probably more so than ourselves. I say there's a certain amount of respect for ourselves in Torfaen in terms of delivering strategically and in terms of policy formulation. I think one thing I would say is that it wasn't a great burden on us to actually oversee this. We jointly appointed a regional officer to undertake the detailed work. We coordinated, I suppose, the strategic group or the officer group to make sure things were progressing, etc. So it was only a hosting arrangement. But you see, I think it was as a result of the support that we got from other colleagues across housing in the region, and I suppose the good practice and sort of the knowledge of history of delivery that Torfaen has got. So we jointly pooled our resources to appoint the regional officer. So it wasn't a huge sort of issue for Torfaen. If it had been hosted in Newport, it would have been the same, I suppose. But it's worked well. So we've had an officer support group, working group. I think Elke chaired that. We wanted to make sure it was delivered on time and on budget, I suppose.
Councillor Powell, I think you've indicated,
Yeah. How are we working with stakeholders to provide temporary accommodation in particular, obviously given the move away from bed and breakfast, etc.?
Okay, I'll kick off and I'll ask Elke to come in if there's anything else she wants to add. As we have a very well-established and well-attended private landlord forum jointly that we host between ourselves and Monmouthshire. We have very often we have 80 attendees at the Landlord Hub, we call it, which is held on a I think it's 3 times a year. We We actively engage with private sector landlords on a regular basis in terms of consulting, engaging, etc. I think we do encourage private sector landlords to work with us and to utilise the opportunities that exist through the Home Seeker Register to advertise their properties, for instance, for tenants through Home Seeker. There hasn't been a huge take-up of that. We do regularly engage with local estate agents as well as private rented sector, asking them, I suppose, to identify or work with us to identify potential opportunities within the private rented sector. I think the New Housing Act is quite different from previous legislation in that we can discharge our duties by securing accommodation in the private sector. One thing I have said in the past to this committee, members will be aware, we haven't got a particularly well-developed private rented sector in Torfaen. It's quite small in terms of the percentage of the market. But I suppose, therefore, it's more important that we engage with the landlords there, the owners there, to see whether or not they are prepared to work with us to identify other options, other opportunities. We do get a lot of landlords who refuse to accept people who are on either very low incomes or who are on benefits, universal credit, etc., which is a real challenge. But we'll continue to try to engage through the Landlord Hub, through direct contact with private sector landlords, to encourage them to work with us to try to have a range of options for local people.
I'm really pleased to hear all of that, Neil, because part of our discussions yesterday about the agenda were about the lack of information about how we've engaged with the private landlord sector. They weren't listed in the report at all, and we had quite a long conversation about why are they not being used as consultees. The landlord forum was brought up, estate agents were brought up. I mean, the next sort of 3 or 4 questions relate to that entire subject. So really pleased to hear that you did engage with all of the things that we were talking about and suggested yesterday. I think Jessie wants to come back in, yeah?
Just from the chair there. I know reading through the plot, it struck me that the risks were kind of, pushing people into the private rented sector was seen as like the negative side, whereas, in many ways it doesn't need to be, because, there is, especially down south in Cwmbran, for example. And my particular question around there was, how are we engaging with those new builds coming in? Because I expect a lot of them will be bought by people who don't live here, obviously, to rent back out on rental market. Are we getting in right at the beginning where those are being sold? That was my...
Where we are able to influence, if you take it back to so the beginning, the start of the inception of a new development, etc. Through planning, we can secure Section 106 agreements and try to deliver affordable housing if the housing strategy team are involved from the beginning, and we work in partnership with our RSL partners. We will have a percentage of affordable housing earmarked within new developments, etc. So we're doing our best at the earliest possible stage to try to secure as much affordable. And I think the issue really is about affordability, because you're quite right. I think there is a fair amount of supply of private rented sector within the south of the Borough in particular, but a lot of it is out of the reach of people who are on either of benefits, not currently working, etc. Circumstances have changed, or they're on low incomes. The rents down in Cwmbran probably are, at a premium, and yet I suppose in the north of the borough there's limited scope and limited numbers up there. So that's another challenge for us, really, is to try to negotiate with, members will be aware that we have negotiated some really good leases, long-term leases with private rented sector landlords for use by us for temporary accommodation. So we've guaranteed the rent over a period of time, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, etc. So we're trying to do the same approach, I suppose, with the private rented sector landlords in terms of securing other opportunities for people who are wanting to join the waiting list on the Common Housing Register, etc. But it's very difficult to influence that, because obviously landlords will run their accommodation on a business footing, and they know how much their outgoings are. They've worked out the rent. And you've also got the challenge of the local housing allowance levels as well, which are increasingly becoming say a challenge for us in terms of the, as I said, affordability for people on low incomes in particular.
Councillor Thomas indicated. Yeah.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah. Can you give us some examples of what you're actually doing to encourage private landlords and to make their properties available? If I was a private landlord, what would you try to sell to me to offer my property up?
We constantly review our provision of temporary accommodation. So we do own two small blocks of flats as a council still. And we've also got our private sector leasing scheme where we work with private landlords to encourage them for us to use that stock for temporary accommodation. We do a number of things to incentivise private landlords, some through the private landlord hub. So we've undertaken a couple of surveys over the last few years. What do you want from us? We make sure that the landlord hub agendas key topics such as updates around Rent Smart Wales, insurances, tax, housing benefits. We're trying to work with our private landlords to ensure that they're aware and fully informed about being a private landlord. We try and link our support services to private landlord properties, so we make information available so actually as a private landlord there's also a range of free support services that can provide housing related support to help you with to help the tenant in any property. We have in the past, when we constantly review our stock, we have weekly management reports around the levels of stock that we contract and whether they're in repair state, move on, voids, etc. So we are always looking at the range and provision across Torfaen, and there are times where a landlord may wish to end that contract, so we're looking at new properties. In the past we've actually advertised. We've gone out and advertised that we're looking for properties through the landlord forum or in different news, I think it was Torfaen Talks or whatever. So we are proactive in making sure that we have those discussions. We do also have an officer who's located within the housing service that offers loans, for example, to empty homeowners or private landlords so that they can bring properties back into use either through rent or sale, etc. So we have a number of initiatives and some key officers. We work very closely with environmental health as well, obviously. So we're constantly having that dialogue. And I did check our Torfaen Homes website. So we've got the council website, which I know is alluded to in this report. We were quite mindful a number of years ago that there was benefit in developing a website that would attract not necessarily people who were coming to the council. So we developed, it's on here, our Torfaen Homes website. So there is a section on there explicitly for private landlords, so it gives some advice and support around what their obligations are, tenancy arrangements. So it's an ongoing process, really. I think for us, we're not a Newport, which has got a hospital, and near the M4 corridor, which has got a very high level of private rented sector properties. We're Torfaen. So it's an ongoing, iterative process trying to keep working with private landlords and dispel some of the myths around accommodating vulnerable households. So we're trying to provide other services, and such as I mentioned earlier, rent in advance bond schemes. We work for white goods and things like that. So there are a number of things we undertake.
I know that Ron wants to come back in. As part of those, though, Rent Smart Wales, I'm very aware of. Would they give, or would you have access to all of the private landlords in the borough that you could individually contact if necessary? Because I think maybe there are some private landlords out there that still don't know 90% of the services that you offer them. And on to Ron.
My question, we talk about registered landlords. Is there any indication at all of how many non-registered private landlords there are out there? Because I know of a couple, but would you know, is there any indication Is it high or low?
I believe, but I think I would probably need to check this, I believe that in relation to Rent Smart Wales, Torfaen is quite high in terms of the level of take-up. I think Torfaen, I can't remember the other authority, so I think we've got quite a good registration level. It would possibly be quite impossible at this stage to know the exact number of non-registrations. We've got things like the census data, which was 2011. So there's still, and of course people will report. What we do find is if, for example, a household presents to us and they're in a private tenancy and the landlord hasn't registered, we are able to advise that household that that eviction can't take place without that registration taking place. So we are able to feed in that way, and I believe we get reports on the numbers of registrations, but I wouldn't drill down to the individuals, although we can check by address, can't we? We can check by address or landlord detail. Yeah.
I think Councillor Powell, yours is next.
Coming back to the regional working there, on best practice and lessons we can learn from other local authorities. But obviously, you're just looking at sort of examples, really. Are we taking it on board, or is it sort of still like a theoretical thing that we could do, or have we seen actual progress?
I think the action plans will pick up a lot on the areas of good practice. For example, we're mindful in Torfaen of things like our extreme weather provision for rough sleepers and homelessness, whereas Newport is better facilitated than ourselves. We're already in discussions with our partner, four other local authorities, around how we can acquire better provision, such as night shelters and things like that. So for me, it's the regional action plan and the local actions is where we can establish what we need to do to take forward all of the review document is 68,000 words, so it covers 25 themes ranging from housing benefit and discretionary housing payments to private landlords to rough sleeping, and each section sort of the findings illustrate where we could do something or not, as the case may be. So we're using that in essence as our action plan, sort of to inform our action plans. So I think we're strong in a number of areas in Torfaen, but of course there are other local authorities in Gwent that we can learn from, or we can model or use their services.
I think the other thing to say there, sorry, Chair, is there is a very active homelessness network across Wales, and I think that so all 22 local authorities are represented on a regular basis. I think they meet quarterly, and there's quite often sort of examples of good practice sort of aired or presented at that forum, and again, anything new that we think is a good idea, etc., then obviously we'll pick up from that. So it won't be just this. I think we're looking at good practice from elsewhere, and I think, being a member of Taipau, for instance, again, we have regular contact with Alicia and her colleagues. They hold regular events, and that part of their role is to disseminate good practice, etc. So I think there's various opportunities for us to tap into where one organisation goes. We're not reinventing the wheel, really. And if somebody's coming up with something, new ideas, new suggestions, new ways of working, obviously we're keen to explore those opportunities across the board, really.
Alicia, I was just going to ask you if you had anything to say.
So in fact, we've got a seminar on homelessness and equality which is happening in October, and one of the kind of topics that we look at is what you're discussing today, the homelessness reviews. And to organise that seminar, I must say that we were looking at a number of reviews that have already been published, and I haven't seen one that is equally as comprehensive in terms of equality and diversity issues, for example, as Torfaen. We were looking for local authorities as well. That the seminar is in North Wales, but we can repeat it in South Wales. But we were looking for local authorities to highlight examples of good practice in terms of perhaps supporting specific groups, working on specific issues as well. And they weren't that forthcoming, so perhaps, From our kind of work and engagement with local authorities, we know that there is a lot of good practice there, and we'll continue kind of promoting it. But I think in general, local authorities can, after doing the homelessness reviews, which are so comprehensive, they can maybe shout louder about their achievements as well. On the private rented sector, we run a project called Open Doors, which is a project in partnership with Residential Landlords Association, where we work with both with tenants, private sector tenants and private sector landlords, to raise awareness of rights and responsibilities related to equality issues. The whole no DSS issue is being considered as well. We work closely with Rent Smart Wales, and the Welsh Government themselves recognise that perhaps more needs to be done to support the use of private rented sector, to help people who are threatened with homelessness or are homeless. And from what I know, that the meetings that we attend there, there'll be more support available, because that needs resourcing as well. We've recently organised a trip to Bristol, a housing association called ACH Housing, who lease a lot of properties from private landlords there. And we've taken along some of the social lettings agencies from Wales. The reason why they were interested is one of the social lettings agencies from Cardiff said that they've got a big drop-off rate of the landlords that they have on the list. Because of the LHA rates, landlords realise they can make more money somewhere else, and they stop providing the accommodation. So we're kind of aware of that challenge as well. What they're doing there is actually that particular housing association provides accommodation for refugees, so people who can stay here legally. But interestingly enough, they get landlords on board by appealing to the ethical side of things, which is interesting. We're looking at it in much more detail, and we'll be sharing that with members soon.
Thank you. I suppose, could there be any potential conflicts in service delivery with other service or public bodies in delivering a regional homelessness strategy? And if so, how would you look to avoid this? We were thinking maybe around duplication or multiple agencies trying to deliver the same service. That's the sort of conversation that we had.
We've not yet taken the strategy for sign-off, and obviously an important element of the development of the strategy itself is today's meeting. So we'll be subsequently taking a report probably to Cabinet in November, December. Between now and then, I suppose we can revisit the strategy in terms of, and the action plans in particular, in terms of that specific issue, really, whether or not there is any potential for overlap. In this day and age, we cannot afford any duplication, any overlap, etc. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything, because obviously we've undertaken quite a consultation exercise, as I mentioned earlier on. We're really pleased with the regional engagement consultation exercise that we undertook, which attracted 140, was it? Significant number of either individuals or organisations. So I think I would like to have thought that if there was any concerns from those organisations at that stage, they would have sort of flagged it up, and etc. But again, we can make sure that we can do another troll, I suppose, in the interim to make sure that there isn't that. And I think we will regularly review the strategy, either maybe as part of ongoing scrutiny arrangements to review the action plan, but also we will be reporting the action plan on a regular basis to the Strategic Housing Forum. So we'd use that forum again to cross-check to make sure that there isn't that unintended consequences, for instance, or duplication, etc. as well.
Councillor Evans, I think you were.
That's good, sir. Are we confident that the staff are sufficiently skilled and have the right training?
Right before the onset of the Housing Wales Act, in 2014, and then when it became live in 2015, Welsh Government have facilitated a significant number of training sessions for staff and linked to the Homelessness Network. I believe Tai Pawb, there's been training links that Alicia may wish to pick up on as well. The staff have recently just undertaken refresher training. the act is still embedding in, and I think what we benefit from sometimes is when we have Wales-wide or training outside of just our local authority, is the staff who are undertaking the training can also learn from other local authorities about how they are doing things. So staff have undertaken homelessness legislation training, health assessment training, mental health training, etc., etc., and that's something that's really important, and we will keep making sure it happens.
Just to add to that, Chair, as part of the Work Smart review process, obviously we are required to undertake a training needs assessment for individuals. So on an annual basis, we will undertake have a conversation with members of staff about their training development needs. Obviously we'll agree, their manager will agree specific training requirements in terms of further development or refresher training, etc. So as well as tapping into the courses that are available that are either put on by, could be other trade bodies, Chartered Institute of Housing, Type O, Welsh Government, etc. Training packages for individuals are sort of bespoke as well to that individual, and we'll make sure that any training needs, development needs for individuals are monitored by their manager on an annual, on an ongoing basis as well.
Councillor Thomas, I think you're...
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So in 6.3, it says that you've got weekly surgeries. Where are these weekly surgeries? And also, how do people know about this service, and how is it advertised?
We have surgeries, and I can't remember the dates off the top of my head, I'm afraid. We have surgeries in Cumbran Job Centre. We have surgeries, we did have them in Pontypool Customer Care, but we wanted to align those homelessness surgeries with support provision, so that has moved to TVA. We have also got support worker surgeries, where we commission some of the support services. It's early days in terms of that, and that's something we were keen about as a result of the Welsh Audit Office, was to try and make officers more present. We regularly send leaflets and adverts out to, we have a homelessness and a supporting people inclusive forum, which is a number of stakeholder organisations and third sector organisations operating across the borough. We regularly put out literature to advertise those surgeries. We're also, it's early days yet, but we're trying to monitor the footfall. So I know in the report it mentions on average we're having about 10 sort of presentations a day. We have developed a database or a spreadsheet where we're looking at whether those presentations are people already known to us, whether they're new presentations, or whether they're people that actually it would be advice and assistance about something else, such as accessing Home Seeker or something like that. So we have got a spreadsheet and a database, but we need to start collecting that and seeing what the outcomes of it is more consistently. But it's quite early days yet. We did have a surgery with support workers, for example, I think in Trevethyn at one point, which wasn't being taken up as highly as we would have liked. So again, it's making sure that people are aware. And we feel that it's a bit of a snowball effect. Once these surgeries bed in, people will start to know about them a bit more. But what we're trying to do is make sure that we've got a much more flexible approach. So instead of having to make a phone call or meet somebody off-site somewhere, people could just drop in when a crisis arises, rather than, so it's a little bit more responsive in some respects.
Councillor Thomas, you want to come back in?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah. So when you say you're sending out literature, where are you sending the literature? Where's it going? How are they picking up where these surgeries are going to be?
We put leaflets in the various customer care centres, we share it with all our multi-agency partners. They're sent round digitally. GP surgeries, we send them to our networks. So ideally people disseminate that literature. We've presented information, for example, at the neighbourhood care networks where GPs are involved, so and any other fora that we share with our partners across the council and outside as well.
Chair, one would say, if you've got any ideas or suggestions as to how we can make sure we sort of disseminate that information more widely, please let us know. We'll obviously gladly do that, because that's the whole point, isn't it? Is targeting those people who, are experiencing a particular issue now, because that's the really important bit, is that we encourage people to come to us at the earliest possible stage to try to prevent circumstances from deteriorating. So any ideas, any suggestions members have about how we can circulate that information, publicise the opportunities that exist, please feel free to let us know. We'll do our best to make sure we get it out there.
I think one of the ideas that we came up with yesterday is that we have a very good communications team in Torfaen, but we don't see an awful lot of that information about if you've become homeless or you're at risk. We don't see we see very little of that going out through Torfaen's own social media or. And again, councillors themselves are all very active. A lot of them are on social media. So perhaps we're missing a trick there by using councillors as a way to, because we are in, a lot of direct contact with, and a lot of people come to councils because they don't want to go to the local authority or the housing association directly. They use us as the go-between. And so I think if not only would we learn more about the service through having that information, but we're also able to directly hit our residents. So I think that was some of the conversations that we had yesterday. Councillor Evans?
Are we looking at food banks as well? Because particularly a lot of these people are on very, very low incomes, in dire financial straits. So, I mean, food banks are, this is probably where you need to be more prominent.
The Homelessness Review makes specific reference to food banks, and I think we're one of the fourth highest users in Wales. We have had conversations in the past with Trussell Trust, and we have feedback that there are instances where people who use the food banks are also homeless, so there is signposting going on. But I absolutely agree. I think we need to make sure that we've got the right communication and services available. Would it be useful? I'm thinking of, talking of the surgeries, but also other communication ways we communicate people's entitlements around homelessness and housing services. Would it be useful if we prepared a bit of a briefing? We could, it could include or a pack. It could include the surgeries leaflets. I know there's a leaflet within this report which outlines the obligations of the Act, which is not particularly easy use, but unfortunately the Act isn't an easy read. So we've also got where people can report in digitally any rough sleepers. We've got that facility. I think if we maybe logged all the different types of information we've got on the Torfaen Homes website, that would probably be useful to members when you're undertaking work with constituents.
Also in Cumbrae, we've got a lot of community notice boards, things like that. People are able to look at. Perhaps if they're not in dire need of these services, they know somebody perhaps are.
Yes, as members you can get our support in that as well. So if there's any new information prepared, we can always look at it to see how accessible it is. Help you make it accessible, and we have access to members across Wales, so we can always suggest any good practice as well. Social prescribing is what a lot of people are looking at now. I don't know whether you've looked at that, so working with GP surgery.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Burnett, I think you...
Thank you, Chair. In the last paragraph, 6.3, what are the findings so far, and has best practice been identified?
I'm looking at 6.3. This links on to the surgeries again, isn't it? And the Supporting People Gateway. I think we're lucky in Torfaen that within the housing service, we've got the Supporting People team and programme grants alongside homelessness prevention grant and the homelessness service. So what we were clear about, and it came through from the Welsh Audit Office review and the report that came out in January 2018, that we needed to be more front-facing. We'd also undertaken a review of our housing solution service since the Housing Wales Act had gone live, and we'd recognised that we needed that more triage approach, more front-facing approach, and that's where we introduced the surgeries. We've also, since in the last year or so, we've developed the Supporting People Gateway, whereby people who are referring themselves or being referred for housing-related support, it actually comes into the Supporting People team located in housing. So we're much more able to work with clients to be able to make sure that we signpost them to the right support services and receive support independently of the local authority as well. I think we're also mindful that the complexity of homelessness is much greater than it used to be, and I just can't emphasise that enough at the moment. So we take very much a multi-agency approach. We've also developed key roles within the Housing Solution Service, such as a mental health liaison officer, which is seen as good practice. We have a young person's housing officer, also funded by Supporting People Programme grant, located within TIPS, the Torfaen Young People Support Service. And we've recently also commissioned a mental health support worker to be based within the TIPS service as well. So we're trying to work much more strategically and make sure that we can, get the right services and people in place to prevent homelessness.
Chair, can I just add something to that? I suppose, just to build upon what Alka said about the complexity of circumstances of individuals, etc. I think it's very rare these days where you get an individual or a family approach you and there's only one element or one issue that is a cause for concern. I think that the challenges that people face within society these days are multifaceted, aren't they? And I think, it goes without saying the vast majority of people who approach us will probably need some financial assistance in terms of advice and guidance, and we've got the financial inclusion team who support individuals go to court and renegotiate with lenders to try to come up with realistic sort of repayment plans, etc. They're quite often sort of mental health issues, challenges for individuals and within families. So it's as I said, it's multifaceted, and that's why it's so important that we don't just look at the sort of circumstances around potential homelessness, but also look at the broader sort of needs of the individuals or families to make sure that we put in place support mechanisms to ensure that when they move on or we rehouse them or etc. That home is sustainable going forward. Otherwise, I suppose you just look at the house inside, the home in isolation. You can rehouse somebody, but unless you actually tackle the root cause of some of the issues and problems, it's not going to be a sustainable sort of home for them to live in. And perhaps in 6 months' time, they'll be faced with similar circumstances and come back round in the cycle, etc. again.
What are your plans to try and minimise the impact of a decrease in support people funding?
We know from the Plaid Cymru Labour agreement and the Early Intervention and Prevention and Support grant that there was a commitment to protect the Support People Programme grant for this current year and next year. We also know that the Welsh Government budget hasn't been set, and we know that in Torfaen we're participating in the full flexibility Pathfinder pilot. So we were working with Welsh Government as one of the 7 local authorities in Wales, where we have 100% flexibility across 10 grant programmes, which include Supporting People Programme grant, Homelessness Prevention grant, Rent Smart Wales Enforcement grant, and a number of other grants. As a budget holder, we continuously operate on considering the likely cuts to grant funding. So year on year, in relation to supporting people in particular, we've often modelled services potentially on a 5%, 10% or 15% cut. I think because we're operating as a Pathfinder pilot, there are still some unknowns, and my understanding is Welsh Government, following a Public Accounts Committee review, are looking at how protection for supporting people is continued into next year. So we're mindful of that too. So I suppose we don't really know whether they're going to be cuts or not. We will certainly be mindful that there could be, and we will plan as we always have done. We are in our programme. We've got a number of tender exercises being undertaken over the next sort of 2 to 3 years. So again, when we go out to tender for services, is a limited knowledge about what price is going to come in. So that will form part of our strategy and our approach. But at the moment, we don't know whether there are going to be cuts. We're hopeful and mindful that there may not be, but that doesn't mean to say there are still pressures within the programme and the funding because of salaries, etc. So we work with our providers very closely. We often have the conversation at the right point in the year where we say, if there are cuts, what do you think? How would you support that? What initiatives could you bring in to actually facilitate that? But it's a bit early yet because obviously we don't really know the settlement. But we do obviously contract with service providers on an annual and a longer basis, so we have to be mindful of that as well. So it's a bit of an unknown at the moment.
Councillor Powell. Okay. This is talking about the website. It's not a criticism just of sort of the homelessness page, but in general, the language used is quite formal. It's a very legislative nature. Have we actually tested this on service users to see if they're able to understand it, for one? And second, because it's such a widely visited page, have we thought about perhaps having a splash page or something on the front page to address it, or even links to Torfaen Homes? In connection with a question later, obviously Torfaen Homes is there, but is it obvious enough? I mean, I'm thinking, I've got probably 50 pens with, Torfaen Homes on, but when I'm Googling, that's what I want, sort of scattered everywhere. But when I'm Googling, I'm still coming up with Torfaen first, and I'm still being instantly directed to this very, very formal.
No, absolutely. I think it's a fair point. It's something that we can improve. I agree with you. I think that, because the legislation is quite prescriptive, and we try to capture, I suppose, what our statutory responsibilities are, but we can do a lot more to make that, I suppose, more easily understandable to the layperson. I suppose officers quite often find it difficult to sort of remember what the different sections of the Act relate to, etc. So it's a very good point, well made, and it's something that we can definitely learn from and perhaps review and see whether or not we can try and position. Obviously, because you've got information both on the council's main website, but also we've developed the Torfaen Homes website as a self-help tool. But if that's not the website that you automatically go to, then that's a bit of a pointless exercise, isn't it? Because there's a huge amount of information in there for people as part of the early intervention sort of approach. So we'll definitely revisit that and think of some of the suggestions that you've made. Thanks very much for those.
Just to add, we have an obligation to issue a statement on our position around homelessness, so that's probably what we're reading, which actually doesn't mean to say we can't put that in more easy read or more useful terminology as well. So absolutely, totally agree.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas?
Yes, thanks, Chair. We have kind of already touched on my next question anyway, with homeless people trying to access information that you're saying is on online and all the rest of it. If you're homeless and you're having an extremely bad time, you're not going to get online at all, are you? So how are they supposed to know about the services that we're offering and stuff? I'm sure you're bound to know about areas of where homeless sleepers are. Would it be a good idea to put like little leaflets up, like the Samaritans do on bridges and stuff like that. You know, so they've got an idea of where to go. You know, tied to a lamppost, to a railing, or something. You know, what are we doing to push this information across to them without the net?
As I mentioned previously, we do have a rough sleeper working group which we initiated quite recently. So, and we do have the reporting of rough sleepers via the website where members of the public can report. I think we know the rough sleepers, and we proactively will go out as and when to actually talk. We will have housing solutions officers who will proactively go and speak with rough sleepers. A lot of people who present to us will come through to the customer care centres, so then they will directly signpost to ourselves or members of the public. Again, I think we've talked about how we communicate and make people aware of the services we have already. I think it would be really useful if we could again have that dialogue about where we could put information, where it's most useful for members of the public, so that it's universally known where to go. So I think we could factor that into some of the communications briefing we were talking about, and any suggestions from members. Yeah.
Chair, just to add to that, I suppose we have, I think it's captured in the report, we're now using sort of text messaging, Twitter, etc. far more. We're embracing that sort of social media sort of opportunities. And it's surprising how quickly that message gets across, whatever. So, but I think we could do more, you're right, in terms of some of those ideas and suggestions, whatever. But in terms of contact with people, especially younger people, people not like an old fogey like me, tend to use that social media, say Twitter and text messaging a lot more. I think you've got to try and get the balance right, I suppose, when you are dealing with individuals, though, I suppose, in terms of making sure that they actually receiving that information and quite often, like you say, they are digitally excluded, although people do, so it's just trying to make sure that we have a record sometimes as well, that we have made contact with individuals, etc., and that we are performing our statutory responsibilities in terms of making contact and following up with the appropriate sort of information, letters, and etc., etc.
Helen, you'd like to come back in? Yeah, just on that one. It's really good to hear there's more use of text messaging, etc. So just to sort of bring up, I know a lot of the time, especially dealing with residents with homelessness issues, etc., that people are transient, people are moving, and it's really important to get hold of them. And a lot of the time, you're dealing with email and posts, and these things are never being seen. Yeah. And so, I'd like to see it rolled out more that, we're making sure not only that they're more accessible, that people are actually have accessed it,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. What are the potential barriers as mentioned in the first paragraph of 6.9? Well, that's 6.9 for you.
Yeah.
So this is about setting out and agreeing expectations of partners, identifying how they will work together to alleviate homelessness. And we've highlighted in the report a number of areas where we work with key partners. I suppose the first paragraph in the main talks about our registered social landlord partners. And obviously we've transferred our stock, so we're not a stock holding authority, so we do rely enormously on registered social landlords. We operate the Common Housing Register on behalf of partner RSLs in Torfaen. So to oversee that, we have an operational group, and we have a Home Seeker Steering Group, which Neil chairs, which meets regularly to review how social housing is accessed. We've also done another piece of work in Torfaen, which we piloted probably a year-ish ago. Is part of the Housing Wales Act is a duty to cooperate around homelessness for registered social landlords. So what we undertook with Bronavon Community Housing, our main RSL in terms of numbers of stock, was we undertook a cooperation assessment an agreement. So we've looked at a number of areas where we feel we could improve or change our ways of working, and that's sort of an ongoing journey, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose, you know, it is critical that, especially when you could be transferred of stock, that we have got effective relationships with our RSL partners. And that cooperation agreement is one of 4 local authorities across Wales that piloted sort of a new template that Welsh Government had developed with WLGA. And it has proved useful, actually. It's identified, it poses a number of questions, really, about the interaction between ourselves and our partners, and identifies areas for improvement, good practice, etc. So it is early days. We have undertaken a recent review of that cooperation agreement. And it has teased out some challenges, I suppose, because in fairness to the RSLs, you know, they are running as a business, and it is important to them that they let their properties as quickly as possible. They secure the rent, you know, rent as much as they possibly can, etc. And of course, we've got that statutory responsibility to try to prevent, but also to respond to homelessness and discharge the duty as and when we can, I suppose. But largely, our main partner, as Zachary has said, is Bron Avon. And there are going to be some challenges in terms of, especially those families or individuals who perhaps are well known to us, probably well known to many people sat on the table as well, you know, who sort of end up going through a revolving door of homelessness, and do pose challenges in terms of, you know, behaviour sometimes. Thankfully, as you know, they're very few and far between, but you know, it is very difficult, I suppose, when we have, as a local authority, statutory responsibility to individuals or families, and yet they've already been evicted, potentially by an RSL for antisocial behaviour or community safety issues or rent arrears. So it's so that cooperation agreement really does help in terms of teasing out some of those challenges, and looks to try to address some of those issues, really, so that we have got that cooperation in place. Because ultimately, you know, we've got to discharge our responsibilities, and they've got to be housed somewhere.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Since developing this strategy, how many people have presented themselves as homeless, and how many have been rehoused?
I haven't got an exact figure because I haven't got an exact date of when the strategy was developed. If you've got a specific time period and you would want information from, I can certainly... Yeah. Within the report there are some statistics, but it wouldn't necessarily align. It goes by the financial years. So we can get more up-to-date figures if that's helpful from a certain date. We're still mindful that the strategy will need to be approved as well. So if there's a time period you're interested in, please let me know. We can have a look.
Another next. What checks do you carry out to ensure people do not present themselves as homeless in multiple locations?
When somebody presents as homeless, we would ask that question, and there is an obligation for the individual to let us know if they've presented anywhere else. When we're investigating the homelessness, we would look at the last known address, and sometimes we'll go back even further at the last known addresses, so that will give us an indication of where an applicant has previously resided. We can then sometimes, if it's suitable, we would make checks to that last known address, for example, if it were another authority. But systematically, every person who presents as homeless in Torfaen, we haven't got a system in place that would check the 22 authorities to see whether they had presented anywhere else. So it's more the onus on the individual to share that information. But then there's also links in place where we could look at last known addresses if that's in other local authorities or whatever. We do have a shared out of hours service, so we've got statutory duty to provide homelessness services 24/7. Our shared out of hours service operates across Torfaen, Monmouthshire and Blaen y Gwent, and the staff work on a rota. So then they may share information about clients to the hosting authority, if you like. But there isn't a systematic way of checking that if anybody who presents hasn't presented anywhere else, for example in Wales or England for that matter.
Sir Thomas?
Yeah, it's just on that question. I mean, do you think that's a good idea that you do that then, cross-check between different authorities? Because now I'm saying that there's dodgy homeless people out there that may be presenting in one authority and then in another, whichever one they get the quickest. Surely it'd be a good idea that we did check, especially the neighbouring ones.
Yeah, just to confirm, as part of the sort of process to assess somebody's circumstances and to consider whether or not we owe them a duty and if they are priority need category, etc., a thorough investigation is undertaken for every individual case, and we will look back to the history over the last, not to say where they presented from, whether that was from, the last known address was in Newport or it was in Flintshire or whatever. So as part of that process, there's that sort of a thorough examination of, I suppose, their circumstances, not just over the last 12 months, but actually over that, a number of years, I suppose. So we would be able to identify, I suppose, where perhaps another local authority owes the duty as opposed to Torfaen, and then we would make that referral back to where they've come from originally. Those cases are very few and far between, I suppose. The number of cases that I'd be aware of and I'd share with you, I suppose, where somebody's presented to us, it's usually where there's domestic abuse and domestic violence has occurred, and they've fled that violence from, and that could be from England, it could be from mid Wales or further west, etc. On those circumstances, the last thing we want to be doing, obviously, is referring them back or whatever. So we would undertake, and there is very close cooperation between local authorities across Wales in terms of sharing information, intelligence, etc., and actually working on what's the best course of action for the individual, depending on their individual circumstances. I've worked in housing for probably 25 years, and I can count on one hand the number of people that perhaps who have presented to more than one local authority at any one time, I suppose. And it's usually because they're not sure what how to present or where to go, etc., or where there's close links between family or friends, relationship between two neighbouring local authorities. So it's very rare. I've not come across any case whereby somebody's presenting. I think having the means to be able to do that is one thing, as well as actually trundling around sort of Gwent and presenting to five different local authorities, etc. It's usually people are very clear about obviously where their local connection is, where their neighbourhood, where their networks are, where their family and friends are, and that sometimes influences and dictates that perhaps they wouldn't become homeless in Cardiff, but they would come to Torfaen because Mum and Dad live in Torfaen. But we would investigate that unless they come up with a potential solution and liaise with our colleagues in Cardiff then in terms of whether we refer them back or whether we deal with the case locally.
Okay.
That's my question.
Sort of going back, we had a conversation earlier about lack of appropriate accommodation and lack of social housing, and one of the conversations that we had yesterday whilst going through the agenda is that I think maybe we're looking for more sort of joined up thinking with our planning department and our asset department, because one of the things that I was quite opinionated about yesterday is that is the council partly to blame for the shortage of suitable housing, and that's no reflection of the housing department or homelessness, but if our planning authority, if our planning departments are not sticking to the number of either buy-to-let or social housing, are we selling off our pockets of land to private developers? I can name half a dozen in Cwmbran at the moment, and shouldn't we be utilising our assets to address some real serious situations? So I think we have a department, a homelessness department that's addressing that, but we potentially have other departments that are not feeding into and are not outwardly and not supporting that by And I know that planning has a whole host of regulations, etc., that they need to comply with, and Asset Department need to maximise land sale for. But there needs to be, I think, more joined-up thinking as well. And possibly that local authorities, I'm assuming, not just Torfaen, have a bit to play in that shortage.
It's not about, I suppose, blaming ourselves, I suppose. The bottom line is, I think it's very difficult, isn't it, as a local authority to balance the needs of local communities with, I suppose, making sure that we have an effective capital programme to deliver improvements to 21st century schools, for instance. You know, as officers, we quite often have interesting debates and discussions about the merits of trying to maximise a capital receipt for the sale of a piece of land or for a former school site or whatever, versus maybe working in partnership with an RSL to deliver more affordable homes. You know, it's an interesting dilemma, and it's a challenge for all local authorities. I think, you know, very clearly over the last 5 years, I think the improvement in school, you know, education, schools as assets has been the priority for members, and we've seen the benefits of that. A number of new schools being built and improvements being made, etc. But equally, you know, quite a few schools have closed, and some of those sites have been offered up to for ourselves and the housing strategy to work in partnership with colleagues, partners in the RSLs to develop new sites, new development sites with the associated affordable housing. Equally, through planning gain and Section 106 agreements, we can negotiate with developers in terms of affordable housing as well. It's, I suppose, a no-win situation. I think going forward, you know, I tend to agree with you. You know, we've got to try and get that balance right, and who's to say if we've got it right or wrong? Well, one thing I would say is there's an opportune time now, I suppose, because we are, as a local authority, reviewing the local development plan. As part of that process, we'll be identifying land for, you know, employment sites or for housing, etc. If members feel that, I suppose, that balance isn't correct as it at the moment, then there's an argument to say, well, you know, we should be arguing perhaps for more land to be earmarked for development for housing purposes. Clearly, there is a housing shortage in Torfaen. That is the bottom line. We've got 2,500 people on the Common Housing Register. We've got increasing numbers of people presented as homeless because of austerity, because of welfare reform. We've got, you know, increasing numbers of people who are on low incomes or reliant upon benefits, etc., who cannot access normal, traditional sort of housing through the normal market, I suppose, and are reliant upon some form of subsidised or affordable housing. It's a real dilemma, isn't it, about trying to get that balance right. But I'm glad members have raised that issue. I think it is something that officers debate and discussion on a regular basis. Maybe it's part of the LDP process. That's something that can be fed into the mix in terms of trying to get that balance right. It depends where we are with the 21st Century School programme as well. You know, have we largely done what we can in terms of new schools, but also improving existing ones? In fairness to the asset management team and corporate resources colleagues, they have offered up some of the smaller school sites that have been closed and redeveloped for us to utilise to improve delivery of affordable housing. But it's, you know, it's there are targets in the LDP. I think that's the one thing I would say is that, unfortunately, in terms of delivering new homes and delivering affordable homes, we're not meeting the affordable homes target that is currently in the LDP. Then there will be a number of reasons for that, but there's no one reason, I suppose, for that. There will be a number of factors that play a part in the fact that we haven't delivered those targets. But it's an opportune time to review those targets and see whether or not we undertake a local housing market assessment which does identify the need for affordable housing. That's updated on a regular basis, on an annual basis, so maybe as part of that, the review of the LDP, we can, you know, members could sort of consider those that dilemma, which is it's a fascinating one.
Part of the conversation we had yesterday really is that, particularly in the south, we've had some large pockets of land that have been sold off, sadly very close to commuter belt, and we're having an awful lot of people moving into certain parts of Cwmbran, and the impact of that is that housing market is absolutely mad at the moment. Houses are selling within some hours and days. Prices are starting to rocket, and that situation is awful for people that have lived here all their life, that can't now afford to buy a property because we've sold off publicly owned land close to commuter belt. It's attracting lots of outside interest. We've got a lot of people moving into the borough with the bridge tolls, being lost shortly, and there's that whole scenario that we need to take into consideration, because if we are not safeguarding some of that for more social housing, then the problem will just get bigger. And I think, yes, we need to address that through our discussions at LDP. Councillor Burnett, did you indicate to come in yet?
Thank you, Chair. Neil, I think you've said it just now. We're not meeting our budget on affordable housing. The only winner here is the developer. You have to look at the television and newspapers. They're making billions of pounds on our backs. As Councillor Haynes just said, we're selling at them as quick as we can to try and get money in our coffers, and we're letting our residents down on housing. Again, the bridges coming off, the tolls coming off, and the influx from across the water. So you see the Severn Bridge, I know, but the houses have the price here, and we really are going to be in a situation where it's just eroding deeper and deeper. And our budget on social housing or affordable housing is getting wider and wider, and we've got to do something now. We've got to look at our planners. I've been on planning for many years. We brought this up before, and we have to do something now before it's too late.
Just to sort of address one of those things, when the council is debating whether or not to market a piece of land, we do undertake a valuation of the site, and we do quite often use District Valuer to give us an independent sort of estimate of how much the land is worth, etc. So there is an assessment made about the value of a piece of land. You see, the targets in the LDP are not being met. I think what I would say is, again, is if you look at the average income for a local resident within Torfaen, we do this on a regular basis. On a quarterly basis, if you look at cost of homes versus cost the average income, and that gap is growing. And a lot of the new developments in the south of the borough, they are those developments, those developers are building 4 or 5 bedroom homes, which are range from 200, 300. Very many local people who have lived in Torfaen for many years cannot afford those. So the target is not Torfaen. It will be those people who have done very well and earning good salaries, etc. But if you look at the average income in Torfaen, that's worrying, because lenders will only now lend up to 3.5 times somebody's income, and that sort of limits people to affordability of a home up to 120,000, which is probably half the price of what the properties in some of the developments in the south of Borough are going for. So it's inevitable, therefore, that interest is going to come from elsewhere.
Again, just said the price of the houses. Let's take Llantarnam School, 6.something million we sold that for, and that developer would make multi-millions of pounds. We should be looking at, if we're going to sell a piece of land and the plans go on there and the developer knows what he's going to make on that, and I think it should be judged on what he's going to make, and we get more money out of it. We could put into ourselves. We know throughout UK these developers really are buying every piece of land, not for today, for 30 years' time, because they know what they're doing. And when Llantarnam was sold for 6 point whatever million, I was shocked, because we knew they were going to make multi-millions of pounds, and we sold it like that. I just couldn't believe it.
I personally think we need to be more mindful that we are helping to create a divide.
Yes.
And I think that's not helpful. And I think that homelessness will only get worse if people can't afford to live in the place that they were brought up. And I think that's pretty sad that situation is developing, and it's quickly developing as far as I'm concerned. But we have some, and I think for us as councillors, the way to address that is through LDP, but also be mindful that officers also need to be a bit more mindful of that growing divide, because you've got £120,000 will buy you nothing in Cwmbran now, but only 5 years ago that was a 3-bedroom house, and it's changed that quickly in Cwmbran, particularly Cwmbran, with it being so close to the M4 corridor. Okay, right, so anything else on that one? No? Okay. I think we're on to you, Ron.
Want me in there?
The figures in section... Yeah. Yeah, you are.
Why have the figures in section 68, duty to provide temporary accommodation, been excluded from 9.6?
I'm glad I brought the report.
You all know the answer, though.
6.8?
9.6.
Sorry, 9.6.
There's different sections, yeah.
What was the question again? Sorry?
Duty to provide temporary accommodation has been excluded from 9.6.
Section 68 that is due to provide temporary accommodation.
Oh, yes.
It isn't in the chart and we wondered why, because section 68, duty to provide temporary accommodation, was quite an important one.
I suspect it's an omission.
Okay.
We can certainly provide that information.
Thank you.
What I will say, it's quite interesting when we look at the various sections of the Act and how they're translated, because people will drop through the sections of the Act. There are instances where people will come in further down and they won't necessarily go through every tier, if you get my drift, because we may quite clearly determine we're a duty or whatever quite early on rather than have to go through the various sections. Ironically, the Housing Wales Act is a really positive step in Wales, I've got to say. The fact that we are placing a statutory footing on the prevention of homelessness is a massive move in the right direction, and obviously the Homelessness Reduction Act in England is sort of following our suit. But we were hopeful that with the Act it would simplify processes, and we're still working with a number of sections which is actually quite convoluted and quite laboursome. So another piece of work we're doing is, we've talked about the success of undertaking surgeries, different ways of communicating with clients, whether it's text messaging, social media. Another piece of work we're starting, and it's one of our local actions, is we're looking at behavioural economics and how our letters to clients, how we have our conversation with clients, so that we provide a better service. Because we're in a flux where we follow the legislation and we have a duty to explain to our clients these stages and sections, but how do we do that in a much more simplified way? We're learning on that still, I think.
Yeah, Councillor Evans.
While we're looking at that one,
Another tricky one.
why are the figures within section 73 in 9.6 with suitable accommodation increasing? So on section 73, it's gone from 315 to 395.
The 2015-16 figures will be as of, if I recall, the 27th of April, so there's a slight reduced period. I suspect It could be the levels of people presenting and the complexity of presentations and those in priority need. But again, it's difficult to unpick the exact story behind those figures.
You see, the leaked year on year, and there's no particular reason for that.
We're very mindful in Torfaen that we had universal credit rollout in July 2017, was it? We were the first authority in Wales to go full service across all job centres. Obviously Flintshire were before us. Since that date, we've had some U-turns and some reprieve on the welfare reforms from February, etc., that have, helped. We were an authority, and I know we've raised this at other fora, we're an authority who has suffered from being an early piloter of universal credit. So automatically people were in arrears. They had the 6-7 week delays in getting universal credit claims through, the first week gap. I suspect that's exacerbated the situation. There'll be other factors as well. I'm sure there.
How will you address the need for suitable, affordable housing and adequate support for those with complex needs?
As part of this process, obviously, that somebody presents to us as potentially threatened with or potentially homeless. So we do look at their individual circumstances, but also, I suppose, their support needs. So we undertake sort of a needs analysis of the wider circumstances of the individual or the family as part of that process. So I say it's not. I try to explain really honest, but it's not just looking at the circumstances in which they are threatened potentially with homelessness. It's actually thinking about, how are you as an individual? What are you facing at this moment in time? Have you got debt? Who do you owe money to? I suppose, are you receiving any medication from the GP? What support mechanisms are in place at the moment? What have you been through in terms of, relationship breakdown, etc.? So we undertake a sort of a thorough assessment of the individual's circumstances to make sure that, as I said, it's not just about looking at resolving their housing situation, it's actually making sure that we're addressing some of those wider sort of social needs and making sure that going forward, say we put them in a position whereby they can maintain or sustain a home going forward in the future. I think in the past the focus was very much on mortgage companies repossessing your property. You've got to get up by XYZ. We need to place you in accommodation by this date. We're actually engaging with the individual now to make sure we understand their personal circumstances and understanding of the pressures that are going on behind the scenes, etc. How do they get into debt in the first place, etc., etc. And what about the relationships within a family, etc. So there's a sort of multifaceted approach to looking at holistic sort of arrangements for the for the individual or the family, etc. And making sure that we put that support in place straight away, even before we perhaps determine whether or not we owe a duty or not, because clearly that individual, is going to deteriorate or circumstances are going to get worse if we don't address those support needs early on or as quickly as we possibly can.
So, stealing your question, Ron, so you're putting the support needs in place and monitoring, I'm assuming, for a length of time to make sure, yeah.
Each client or household will have a personal housing plan which is tailored to their needs. Even earlier on than when people come through homelessness, we're trying to take a proactive approach to reducing homelessness. So, for example, when people access our common housing register, and they may wait on the register for a number of years, we ask the question, do they need any support? And then they can get signposted even at that stage. Within the housing services and with partner organisations, we have a dedicated financial inclusion service because we find a lot of the homelessness is financial hardship or eviction through rent arrears or whatever. So we have a dedicated team who monitor how much they raise and save for clients, and that does some really good prevention work. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a mental health liaison officer who works very closely and very well in discussing cases with, for example, mental health services, the health board and others. We'll have good understanding of medications and diagnoses and etc. We have a young person's housing officer. There are other officers we try and then the support services who we work with. We have a crisis service which we work with Pobble Group and one of the service providers there, so we can do that very quick, responsive type of arrangement, and then we're undertaking surgeries and things like that. We also we're trying to, for a number of years, and members may not be aware, we've been trying to, we did research a number of years ago around homelessness and people's perceptions of homelessness and getting a house, and especially in Torfaen. We undertake a schools project where we go into schools and we ask the pupils, what are your expectations of getting home? What do you know about affordability and homelessness? We ask them a set of questions. We tell them some of the realities. We tell them how they can signpost to our services and other, and then we do a questionnaire afterwards to try and educate their beliefs around I present to the local authority, to the council, and I'll get home. Well, those days are sort of gone to a degree, aren't they? So we even earlier, even as young as school children, we've been undertaking that project for about 4 years. We've held lessons with over 1,500 pupils. So we're trying other generations coming through who have been very used to an authority area with a very high level of social housing. When the Cumberland Corporation days, we've got the new town. There's lots of affordable social housing. So we've still got that generational perceptions that we're trying to mitigate there too. Difficult to ever understand the true benefits of that, because obviously it's a very longitudinal.
And I love that. I think that's really a well thought out plan, that getting in there with and changing opinions of to the right thing. I think that's a really good idea. That's very good. Any other questions on that? No one yet.
How do you obtain customer feedback as mentioned in 9.9?
Everybody that comes through the housing service, whether it be through the homelessness route, the home seeker, or any other service, we've developed customer feedback questionnaires, and we encourage people to complete those questionnaires. Everybody receives a copy of the questionnaires. We encourage people to complete those and feed those back. Interestingly, we get a significant number of compliments as well as comments and complaints, etc. So yeah, and we do monitor those, because it is important, because let's be honest, we're dealing with very vulnerable people who are in very difficult circumstances, and quite often members of staff feel the brunt of that and have to deal with sort of people who sort of not already in very stressful scenarios and circumstances. But so it is important to to acknowledge, I suppose, where somebody's provided a good service and make people make compliments, etc. So we do analyse, we provide quarterly reports, we analyse those customer feedback surveys, we extract any narrative, any comments that are made, but we also obviously look at, we rank ourselves, I suppose, from very good to very poor, and that will form a quarterly action plan in terms of analysing that feedback, and I personally review those questionnaires, surveys, etc. Not the individuals, but the analysis on a quarterly basis, and make sure we put in place action plans to address any particular issues. And we also look at trends over a period of time, so we'll do an annual report as well. Those reports are also provided to the Home Seeker Steering Group in terms of both homelessness and the Home Seeker service. So again, strategically with our partners, we're looking at customer feedback to make sure that we're taking on board comments, both positive and negative comments.
Councillor Powell, thank you. Just wanted to come in there. We talked a little bit earlier about staff training, etc. But I was just wondering, following on from that, obviously it can be quite upsetting, you're dealing with lots of cases. What support is there in place for staff? Do we feel that it's adequate, especially as complex needs are only going to increase?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As well as, I suppose, the arrangement we've got in place, every manager meets with their members of staff within the team on a monthly basis, and obviously we call that supervision, and those are documented. as I said, there's an annual review of training needs, development needs, etc. But I think you can tell, can't you, I suppose, when you're working in a close environment, you know, we haven't got many members of staff in housing these days, but if somebody's had a difficult case to deal with, you know, everybody else rallies around and sort of make sure that, you know, quite often everybody knows about the circumstances, etc. So I think, you know, we encourage members of staff to talk openly about those issues, to seek advice and guidance. The council has also, I suppose, commissioned the use of Care First, which is an organisation to offer support independently for members of staff. National organisation, free to every member of staff. We encourage take-up of that as well, because there's some very good both staff and management support mechanisms on the website. There are opportunities for individual counselling services, etc. So there's a range of opportunities, of course, for individual members of staff, both on a day-to-day basis, but also, again, over a period of time. And they can access that information, that advice, guidance, support, outside of working hours as well, with Care First. We also have a health and safety group which I chair across the service area, which meets on a quarterly basis. And again, encouraging members of staff to come forward with any particular concerns about either individuals or circumstances, so that we've got a mechanism in place to address any health and safety and well-being issues as well.
In July, the Free Press mentioned that Monmouthshire is drawing up a new policy on homelessness, homeless households being placed in bed and breakfasts. Do you know if this has been completed yet and what the outcome was? And is this in line with sort of Torvine's policies and procedures, or is it part of this, you know, taken into account for this strategy?
Yeah, we were interested in picking up on that, and obviously, again, as part of the regional approach, we do tend to share, I suppose, issues that have been taken forward. I'm pleased to say that Monmouthshire's policy probably almost word for word sort of reflects the approach that Torvine adopts in terms of its use of bed and breakfast. In fact, it's a very comprehensive policy that Monmouthshire have developed, and maybe has documented, I suppose, a process that we've had in place for some time that maybe we haven't got explicitly documented in the same way that they have. But looking at the policy that they took forward to their cabinet, it reflected, as I said, virtually word for word in terms of, you know, the approach that we've adopted in Torvine for some time, really. So it's formalised, I suppose, the principles that we've embraced for, you know, since we've used B&B locally.
How do you plan to launch and communicate this regional homelessness strategy once it's been adopted by Cabinet? And then moving on from that, how will you evaluate and measure whether the strategy is effective for reducing or dealing with homelessness with service users? A bit of a lot of information.
Yeah. Operationally, you will have picked up in the report that we developed a regional task and finish group to develop the strategy and oversee the research officer work. We envisage that actually the group will be meeting next week, is it? Soon. And the recommendation is that that group continues. So that group will continue to review then the delivery of the oversight of the strategy and the reviews, and making sure that especially the recommendations or actions that impact on a regional basis are implemented regionally, so that we don't miss out on best practice. In addition, I suppose the strategy itself and the action plan, as I said earlier, would be regularly reported to the Strategic Housing Forum. There is potential for Scrutiny Committee to 12 months' time to perhaps as part of the visioning for next year's programme to think about maybe asking for a report on how the strategy is being delivered. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The potential is, I think, working very closely with the Cabinet member, quite keen to raise the profile of what we are doing in housing. I think there is potential for member seminars as well about, again, identifying the challenges that we face in terms of addressing homelessness and the requirements placed upon us. and again linking that to the delivery of the strategy. There's a number of different opportunities for us to explore, but there's a strategic housing forum that meets quarterly that will oversee the delivery of any strategy, so the new local housing strategy, the new homelessness strategy when it's approved by Cabinet. And as I said, I would encourage potentially, I would be suggesting maybe in the visioning for next year to perhaps revisit the delivery of both the local housing strategy and the homelessness strategy. Okay,
I suppose it's just we're obliged to have our strategy and review and action plans in place by the 31st of December this calendar year. So ideally we're all going to be in a position, the Gwent authorities. We are also required to periodically review and complete a new exercise every 4 years. So we'll be doing this again. We've got a good template now, and we've got a good sort of footprint, if you like. So it'll be the first time we're doing this with Welsh Government. I'm sure they'll have expectations how they want to monitor progress of those strategies. We'll have our regional action plan, regional actions, which will be monitoring progress on a regional basis, and then our local actions as well. So, and ultimately some of the information and figures we already collect, such as the WHO12 statistics and other statistics, we'll be able to sort of see what changes there are there. But similarly, when we redo that exercise in a 4-year timescale, it'll be interesting to see what the changes are. I mean, I'd like to think things will be far better around homelessness and service provision, but...
Alicia?
Yes, and again, as members, you can kind of utilise our help and support in looking at how you measure the success of the strategy. One thing that I would kind of recommend really looking at is the equality monitoring. So one of the recommendations from Wales Audit Office was to look at it, and I saw that you've reported on that. So whilst the homelessness review was very comprehensive in terms of utilising the consultation and the separate survey that you did on experience of homelessness and the kind of equality and diversity aspects of that, there wasn't really an analysis of how homelessness prevention, for example, is successful for different groups of people. So that's the main weakness, kind of across the board, really, across Wales. Now that was the main thing that was picked up by the auditor. So, for example, if that table with the different parts of the duty, it would enable them to look at, for example, issues like mental health and then trends. Is the success rate kind of increasing, for example, as a result of your mental health investment, or is it decreasing? The impact of what's happening income-wise. So, that's probably something that we would recommend and we can help with as well.
Sort of moving on from that, really, Alicia, what I was going to ask you, if you don't mind, is that the Wales Audit Office review concluded that more needs to be done by local authorities in Wales to prevent homelessness. In your opinion, do you think this strategy aims to do that?
Yes, definitely. I mean, you can definitely see the difference between the review and, just the kind of first page of the strategy, really, and the messages in this report. The difference between that and, what's happening maybe in Wales a few years ago, where people kind of worked much more in silos. There's a lot of conversation today about going more upstream and linking with different services, and a lot of that is covered there. So, definitely, I think that, every effort is being made to look at homelessness from a very different perspective, really. Yeah.
It's good to hear, thank you. Yeah. And my last question really is about the Public Service Board. Have you consulted with the Public Service Board?
Not explicitly, no. And I suppose there is potential, linking it to the last question, I suppose, for us to report on the strategy to the PSB, I suppose. I know there's been some comments recently about, I suppose, housing featuring or not, as the case may be, in terms of the PSB. So it may be something that's, through the committee would be interested in perhaps suggesting, I suppose, I'm more than happy, I suppose, to take that on board and maybe sort of take the strategy. I really do think, even though we've been heavily involved in it, I really do think it's a good, it's a good strategy, a good piece of work, and it brings together, as Alicia just alluded to there, I suppose, services that perhaps previously were being delivered in isolation, separately in silos, etc. So we're trying to coordinate the sort of holistic approach to support individuals through a very traumatic period in their lives. Let's be honest. So maybe taking it to PSB would be a good idea.
Thank you. I think you've got our last bit.
I've got two down, which was we're working with stakeholders to provide temporary accommodation, which was to Alicia, but I think we already covered that. And the other one, obviously we have a lot of stakeholder engagement, but obviously that doesn't cover everyone. What we're going to do going forward to encourage those to feed in, and as I said, we'll be regularly reviewing, but what sort of mechanisms will there be for those partnership organisations to feed in?
Some of the actions in the regional action plan is very much around communication and how we build momentum around the strategy. We haven't really discussed whether we did have a large event when we actually undertook consultation with stakeholders about the review, and a whole host of organisations came along, and we did a lot of consultation obviously with actual service users, and I'm quite pleased by the numbers that came through, because people don't necessarily want to respond on the subject, but I think we had over 216. Something we need to think about is whether we repeat that type of either event and service user engagement. I think that's something we need to explore on a regional footing rather than just, we already do some local stuff, but I think we need to keep that going. But it's one of the actions on the regional action plan is to explore our sort of communications and awareness and promotion strategy.
Just to add to that, Chair, I just thought about it now. We do annually engage with service users and providers as part of the Supporting People regime programme, and we do a great wide needs mapping exercise. We can easily link that exercise to this and actually do a joint arrangement whereby we're engaging with where specifically, because obviously Supporting People grant is specifically there to support the prevention of homelessness and to support people who have become homeless. So I think we can link the two exercises rather than sort of have a different event, but maybe sort of make those linkages and engage and utilise that engagement exercise, because we do that on an annual basis anyway, so we can make that link to.
So members, have we got any other questions for Neela, or Alicia? No? I think they got it. I know that this scrutiny meeting was going to be shared on Facebook. Have we had any responses at all? No? Okay. Then anyway, I'd like to thank you for attending. There's no need for you to stay for the next bit. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you for all of the answers. Really appreciate you coming. And for your opinion, Alicia, on the strategy. Very, very helpful. Good.
We do this regularly on a national level, but perhaps,
Thank you. And thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So members, let's sort of look at what the Scrutiny Committee's been asked to consider, so that we can formulate our recommendations. The committee has been asked to consider the approach taken for developing the local homelessness review and regional homelessness strategy, and to feedback accordingly, and to review the progress that's been made in meeting Wales Audit Office's recommendations for addressing homelessness. So members, we'll need to formulate some of our recommendations. Councillor Thomas, yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just one of the main ones that I picked up on that I would like to put forward as a recommendation is that we look at a better package deal offered to private landlords to encourage them into putting their properties up for rent, especially for the reasons that we've already gone through, the lack of housing. So that's something that I think that they really do need to look at deeply, and what they can actually put together to really encourage private landlords.
Councillor Burnett.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I think we touched on the LDP, and of all the years I've been on planning, this has come up time and time again, and I think we've got to be putting recommendations through the planning department to be looking at this to stop the erosion of the gap between affordable and non-affordable then. It's just getting bigger and bigger, and as you said, Chair, with the bridge tolls coming off, there are more and more people coming across buying up the homes here and pushing the prices up, and looking at developers for what the price they get land for. I mean, if we put a higher price on it, I'm sure it'd slow the developers up, and they wouldn't be so quick as to buying all the land up and charging the phenomenal prices. And we all see it in the media all the time. They're making billions of pounds. The fat cats are getting their big cuts out of it. I won't mention the one that we all know about, because the P. The financial gain from they've had from that has been phenomenal, and they're buying all our land up, and we've got to be, as a planning department, not just us, all planners, be good looking at it and putting the thumb screws on them a little bit.
So I suspect then, very much that we need to be working more with other departments within the authority, particularly planning, so that we can maximise land sale, but also attach different or better recommendations on sale of land, so that there's more dedicated, perhaps social landlords or more affordable housing, somehow addressing it through that. I think we need to be
conditions on this.
Absolutely is what I was trying to find in mine, but didn't get to.
We've got to be mindful to implement this strategy that we got shrinking budgets. So we've got to be careful that we can provide the same services we've got now with less money.
Wasn't there something around the Public Service Board that we wanted to to engage with because there doesn't seem to be any engagement with the Public Service Board, and I think we might have missed a trick there to have them, to make sure that strategies are aligned, etc. I know that yesterday there was a couple of other that we picked up on initially before even the meeting, that we'd progress of the strategy submerged into an action plan, such as the action plan that has been used to monitor the WAO's proposals for improvement, and the other one was recommended that better use of traditional methods be used, such as leaflets, posters in customer care and drop-in centres, informing people of the help and advice that is available, but also tagging on to that the use of social media and mobile phones in particular, so that contact can be made with the proper person without relying on letters, etc. Yeah.
So can we have a specific one that they look at the website, just because in case that gets buried, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, make contact, and because the most amount of hits are going to the Torvine site, so we need something on to go to Torvine Homes where it's much more user friendly. So people are accessing the information, but unfortunately they're accessing the more regimented legislative page, and that needs to be, you need to go here if that's what you're looking for.
You want to take the legal list.
Any other recommendations?
Yeah, Chair, I was just going to say about the advertising. I don't think the way that the advertising is being done is good enough, because of their focus is so much on social media and whatnot. And if you are truly homeless, you can access that. So leaflets and tying things to lampposts and stuff. The other thing I was going to say was just about when we were talking yesterday as well, about cross-checking with different authorities. I don't think Neil quite grasped what I was saying with that was that if you present yourself as homeless in Torvine, I do think we should check that that person hasn't presented themselves as homeless in Newport or Blaenau Gwent. I think it's important that we do that. He did say that he's never come across it, but he did also say that he's never checked, so he's never going to come across it if we don't check it.
I would think what our responsibility is, if somebody came up from England way, you could come into Wales and as you said, present, and without anybody knowing, you could have 5 authorities he's waiting for. And it could.
I think we should.
Yes.
I actually put a recommendation down for that. It was more about revisiting the strategy in the near future to ensure that no duplication in service delivery within the region, and also to ensure that appropriate progress has been being made against what we said we were going to do in the strategy. So hopefully that can be done.
Will they actually? That's great. But will they actually click on to what we're trying to say with cross-check, that we feel that they really do need to cross-check with neighbouring authorities?
You'd think that with the regional working that they would have some sort of central access point, that a name could be put into a database and it flagged up no, and it's sort of, you know.
My worry is not so much that they're presenting in multiple authorities to try and work the system. It's more, why aren't we working better with our partners to find accommodation? You know, we should have this database centrally. Absolutely. Yeah.
The question I asked is, you know, if they have been homeless and we rehomed them, there's no statistics. There's no figures to say what they've done and who's been homed. You know, so we've got no. They could say we've got 10 people and rehomed 60. We don't know. It's just to my.
Lastly, there was something that Alicia drew on at the end, and I don't know whether you want to include that as a recommendation. She offered her organisation's assistance in monitoring the strategy going forward and measuring the success of the strategy in particular. But she did go on to say she would like to see a recommendation around how homeless prevention is successful for different groups of people, whether it's ethnic minorities or people with mental health issues. She'd like some sort of recommendation from the committee which would pick that up for Neil and Alka to consider within the strategy going forward.
Steve just said. Let's get the stats on it, and that is what she's saying, that people then, you've got proof of 10 presented, we own 6, and you've got to have some statistics there, haven't you? That's what she's saying there.
Definitely about the offer of them to be held, that definitely needs to be formulated. Oh, absolutely, we need to go. Yeah, absolutely. So, members, do you think we've got quite a few there, 8 or 9 recommendations? Thank you very much for your time. So let's just go on to the date. We've got a couple of other little things to deal with. Date and time of the next meeting. Members, our next meeting is on the 24th of October, and we'll be looking at highways maintenance. I know that that would be quite interesting, but I just really need to let you know that Blaenau Gwent Council have contacted us, and they've confirmed that as part of their member development, 2 of their officers and 8 of their members will be coming to observe our meeting on the 24th of October. I know I said I don't know whether they're coming to be as us to be an example of good practice or not, but that will, but we shall see. Anyway, they'll sit within the public gallery and just be, it'll be normal procedure for us, as though,
they're not there.
Yeah, well.
Are they coming to the
Sadly, we will be facing.
Are they coming to the pre-one or?
No, the actual webcast one. And I think at the last informal chairs briefing, it was decided that going forward, all committees need to ensure discussions and agreements take place on what's being scrutinised in preparation for the next meeting. In particular, what the purpose of the meeting will be, what the key questions are that the committee wants answered, and who should be invited to attend as any key witnesses. We've circulated a copy of this yesterday, so that we could have a look at and to see if there's anything else we wanted added to it for inclusion within the report. In particular, whether we have any further suggestions on who can be invited to the next meeting. Over on the back, suggested key witnesses to be interviewed as part of the committee meeting. I know we had a sort of a brief discussion on this yesterday, and is it appropriate to maybe invite a contractor that we use for highways maintenance, whether that would be appropriate. There isn't anybody else that I could think of in relation to highway maintenance, other than if we could have, maybe a resident or two that would be willing to, that would have an opinion.
I was thinking, actually it's just come to me, maybe we could utilise one of our forum groups that we have within Torvine. I'm sure I can find out who they are.
We do have quite a few councilmen, don't we?
I do. I mean, I'll find out. Yeah, I don't know if that's possible.
I think it would be good to have definitely a resident perspective on, because, it's a massive issue, highway maintenance, for a lot of people. Apparently, statistically, we are up there, but reputationally, we are right down, and it would be good to have both sides there. No, and I think we're missing the trick there.
Yeah, what about, I don't know whether we would be able to or not, but I mean, what about perhaps maybe a ward member that's not on this committee, but was an officer in a neighbouring authority on highways? He's more knowledgeable than what we are on this subject.
Field,
yeah. Would be able to do, Chris?
I'll make some inquiries. I mean, I think the focus of the report...
We have probably. I don't think you do asking twice.
The focus of the report will be to look at do we prioritise capital monies for highways maintenance adequately to manage the risks associated with keeping the highways safe. But in particular, I think the focus will be on how we can raise public perception on what it is we do. So, but I'll make some inquiries and with, who did I say it was? I forgot his name. Steve Jarrett. I said forget his name. Steve Jarrett, and I'll let you know.
Once all of this has been finalised, Leanne will send it out. Is there anything that you'd like to add, or anything that you'd like to say about this? Anything else that you'd like to know? Okay, then thank you very much for attending. It's been great yet again, and I shall see you at the next meeting. Thank you.